all know you wonder. It is as clear as balls on a tall dog that you wonder. Epicloud, everybody. Oh gosh. Okay, so where do I start? It has been a long time since I have done a podcast of any sort. Even the ones that I had done over the past couple of years or past year that was more based on interviews with fellow musicians were more of a departure from this original idea of the podcast, and were much more of a pragmatic move where I could make some money to do those podcasts, hence the ads and all that. And as much as that sort of thing is abhorrent in many ways to me, the circumstances that have surrounded the last couple of years, just you got to try and find a way to make ends meet, right? That being said, that format of podcast of me interviewing people, it's not like I didn't enjoy it, but I also didn't enjoy it. I think the thing is, it's less about being just fundamentally selfish or that I don't care about others. It's just that I reflect on others as a way of being able to explore my own process, and the social aspects of those sorts of things I find are what need to take a back seat right now anyway. So this is going to be a rambling podcast. It's loosely based around Epicloud. Came out in 2012, Inside Out Records, September 18th, 2012, apparently the 5th album of the Devin Townsend Project series, 15th studio album. So we will base it around Epicloud, but I will also veer off into other avenues just because I'm in the midst of mixing the moth here, and my life has undergone significant changes over the past couple of years on a personal level, on a business level, on a professional level, on a physical level. Like all these things just get older, right? And I think the nearest I can equate any project to the moth, like the psychological demands of the moth, I guess the most similar things would be things like Alien or Infinity. The difference, though, is I'm in a much more stable place as a person. By choice, I think. I think that my artistic process, I'm more and more aware of how erratic it is and how much it drags me along with it on its psychological trajectory. In that the sheer bulk of the workload I can lose myself in, because I know that the process of making the type of music that I do is going to just mine the depths of wherever I'm at that particular point in my life. And then the music, as a result, becomes sort of a manifestation of the emotional qualities that were inherent to that time. Epicloud was very different than where I'm at now with Moth, of course. But Epicloud was written directly on the heels of and during the latter parts of the Devin Townsend Project series of albums. You know, Key, Addicted, Deconstruction, and Ghost. I had been toying with the idea of doing a new Ziltoid record at this point, prior to doing Epicloud. And I recognize in hindsight that my desire to make that Z2 record, the Ziltoid 2 record, was more that it would rationalize the expense of making the puppet show that I put up on YouTube, the ZTV stuff. And as a result of my focus, I think, unknowingly at the time, being more directed towards the puppet show rather than the music, whenever I sat to write something, a more commercial type of music started coming out. Much to my chagrin at the time, I guess, because I was trying to reconnect with the whole Ziltoid aesthetic. But delving deeper into this creative process, the The idea of fostering one's intuition is arguably the most important creative trajectory that you can choose to follow, in my opinion. And what I mean by that is I'm driven by what compels me rather than what, I know I should do. What compels me is where my interests lie. And typically, the way that my interests manifest from record to record is in reaction to whatever came before. So, for example, on the heels of Deconstruction and Ghost, Addicted in Key, which was conceptually all connected and based on trying to explore the parameters of what a new life was feeling like. At that time, the new life included children and moving to a new town and all these sorts of things. And so the 4 Devin Townsend Project albums manifested as a sort of comprehensive overview of that particular period, which lasted 2 years. And as a reaction to that, it wasn't Ziltoid music that I started feeling compelled to write. That sort of complicated, humorous, alien aesthetic was still a year away. I found that my natural inclination at this point was to explore the idea of more commercially acceptable song structures. It's important for me to point out that my desire to do so is not under any illusion that by making music like that a 45-year-old at the time, bald, middle-aged dude with fucked up teeth was going to be a hit single or any such nonsense. It was more based on a reaction to Deconstruction being as complex as it was. It was a reaction to Ghost being as kind of reserved as it was. And I think that upon completion of the Devin Townsend Project, my proclivity for enjoying commercial music just sort of came to the forefront based on it's just easier. I had followed up all this complicated stuff, and I just started writing verse, chorus, verse, and as a result of that, I actually found myself being very drawn to trying to figure out what other people do. That lasted for maybe 2 or 3 records between Epicloud, Z2. I forget what the third one was after that. I'm sure we'll get to it. But as a result of my interest in those sorts of structures, I started talking to friends of mine that were reasonably successful songwriters, and some friends of mine came through town that were able to construct really interesting 3-minute, 33-second musical pieces that somehow didn't seem derivative, yet the structure is the same thing that everybody uses. And I found myself interested in that type of creative avenue. Again, not for any aspirations of fame and fortune, but more just the art of it. I had spent a bunch of time with again, some famous songwriters, 2 or 3 of them over the years prior to that. And I had a bird's eye view of how a lot of these commercial songs get written. There's the anomalies. There's people who will make a song unexpectedly, it becomes a hit or things like this. But more than that, I was trying to find like a continuity between all these songs and what made these frankly derivative song structures not seem as derivative when it came to songs that I appreciated. And so I started watching people write, and I engaged in writing experiences with several high-profile artists, and I just really wanted to know how they did it. And I was fascinated to see how a lot of these quote-unquote sort of hit factories work. There's like a committee of people, and they would peruse what was popular on the Billboard Top 100 or the active rock charts or the pop charts, and then they would then juxtapose that with things like the season that that particular song was meant to come out, and maybe it should be minor or maybe it should be major. And by looking at this Billboard Hot 100 chart, I was watching these people being like, "Oh, double kick is number one in this song right now, so we should add double kick in ours." Or there's a certain chord structure that is topping the charts right now, Ariana Grande or something, and so incorporating those sorts of chord structures, my first thought was, there's no way that would work. There's no way that people are that gullible. But I watched it happen real time with this writing crew. They were joking about it. They're like, we're going to try this just to see if it works. And they wrote a song based on a hit single. And I saw this happen. And then put it out, and it was a success. There was nothing in there that came from a perspective that I found myself relating to in terms of musical output. Music for me has always been this weird dual-edged sword. I love music. I love being able to sing and play and manifest the ideas that are in my head in some sort of tangible way. But it's such a possession with me. Like I can't, when I'm compelled to do something, it just becomes all consuming, and it's not a particularly healthy emotional environment. But it's also one that I've made peace with the fact that that's what I am. I'm an artist. I'm a strange, sort of pointy, awkward, uncomfortable artist that just hears what I hear. And so watching these people put together these songs in the complete opposite way to any sort of creative process that I had ever invested myself in was frankly fascinating and a bit perverse, I would say. But also it was just interesting to see if I could utilize some, not all, some of those sort of techniques. Like, okay, so this is intro, and then there's a verse, and then there's a pre-chorus, and the verse is typically smaller, and the pre-chorus is a little bigger, and the chorus is really big, and certain production techniques and certain mastering techniques. And I just found that after Deconstruction and Ghost, it was more like a hobby for me. One of the people that I ended up sort of doing some writing with at that time was Robin and Gareth from the band Pendulum. Knife Party is their electronic project. And I saw them in Vancouver, and then I went and worked with them in their studio in London. And somewhere there's a strange little song that we had put together that's not particularly fantastic for any of us, but it was more, again, the experience. And they had a song on one of the Pendulum records. Oh gosh, I forget the name of the song, but I just loved it because it was like a lullaby in a way. And when Pendulum came to Vancouver on one of the rare occasions, granted this is 15 years ago, so this does not happen anymore, but I actually went to a show. I went to their show, and then we went out, and I said, hey, I love this song of yours. I think it's really cool. And Rob was just like, oh, I guess it seems like you like the lullabies when it comes to pop music. And I was like, maybe you're right. Maybe that's what my foundation for it was. And so I wrote a song, and again, with no expectation of it turning into a record. There was no Epicloud. There was nothing. It was just a reaction to Deconstruction. And I wrote the song Save Our Now based on the structure that Pendulum had used for their song. And I put it out not because I was trying to convince anybody that this is my track or anything like that. In fact, on the record, it clearly states that the structure and everything was directly taken from that song of theirs. It was really, as somebody who defaults to and whose intuition leads them in musical directions that are almost always psychologically invasive and complicated and a metaphor for things that I can't find language for. And, as I've mentioned on numerous occasions in the past, as a result of my emotional, literal retardation as a younger man, the loophole of writing music is where I was able to just put all these things, and it just manifested as this, it's what I do. It's this endless output of sort of weirdness. And I can't not do it. I've decided that. That's how my mind works. And so with these songs I was working on, Save Our Now and whatever, it was not anything to do with what I was doing. And then, but when I would play it back, I'd be like, oh, I really like that. I really like that. It's that structure. It's that thing that I don't have to think about. There's no intellectual effort that goes into processing what I'm hearing. And I think on the tail end of deconstruction, specifically, that was just very welcome. And again, the process is really, one thing is the reaction to what came before. So we were on tour at the midst of this. We were on tour with Devin Townsend Project. We had just done the 4 shows in the UK for Ghost, Deconstruction, Addicted, and Key. And we were on tour promoting all that stuff still. And I found myself on the tour listening to these silly pop songs that I had been working on based on the structures of these more commercially acceptable types of artists, right? And when I was on tour, I just really enjoyed listening to it. I would always go back to these demos. We're out there playing whatever, Deconstruction or Poltergeist or Jalar or any of these things that were really, over the top. And as a balm to that, I found myself really enjoying listening to these demos that I had put together with no intention of them going further. And I was sitting, I forget where we were, but we had to take a flight early in the morning, and it was actually Mike St. Jean and I were seated next to each other. And we had a window seat in our row. And as I was looking out, the term Epicloud just came into my head, as is often the case with these records, Teria, Axolotl, Epicloud, Moth, whatever. It's like these words just seem to pop into my head, or I stumble upon them, and then I at least have the degree of awareness of the process to be able to recognize that term seems to summarize, without saying much, the emotional and aesthetic qualities of any given time. And Epicloud came into my head as we were taking off. And as we sort of went through the clouds, it had been a rainy day below, and then as we went through the clouds, it was just a beautiful day above the clouds. And I remember saying to Mike, Epicloud is a cool term. Epi meaning, I guess, above. I don't know if it means above, but we're above the clouds, and it's also the double entendre of epic loud, because, I'm 15. And so on that tour, I forget, we must have been in Europe, but on that tour, the hobby of trying to figure out how normal human musicians write this fucking shit, I started to really enjoy what was coming out, and Epicloud seemed to summarize the sort of aesthetic qualities of what we were trying to achieve with this jubilant yet sort of traditional and easy to listen to hard rock structure that also seemed to include these kinds of songs like Save Our Now. But as is the case with me, Epicloud didn't end up entirely like that, and I think a lot of that is I could only sustain the interest in that type of writing for 4 or 5 songs. Like what were the ones that were based on me trying to figure out how music works? Liberation, Where We Belong, Save Our Now, Hold On, Angel, More, to a certain extent. So there were those songs I was able to sustain the interest for. But then once I decided that, hey, this could be an album, actually, I could do it quickly, I could kind of get it out, and it doesn't seem like it would be a huge amount of psychological work to sort of articulate this. And so I chose to begin doing that on that plane flight. I said to Mike, I'm going to make this record, Epicloud. Unexpectedly, it's going to be this kind of easy to listen to, more commercial thing, right? So I'm trying to remember where it went from there. I think we got a tour in Australia. That's what it was. So I forget which iteration of the Big Day Out or Soundwave Festival it was in Australia. I think it was Soundwave, and Devin Townsend Project was on there, and it was the same. You'll probably remember the year if you're there, but it was, ourselves and Meshuggah and Gajira and Marilyn Manson, and I forget who else. So that was the year, and then we traveled across Australia. It was a fantastic tour, beautiful summer, and I love Australia, and the audiences were great, and band was getting along. It was really cool. And I thought, you know what, because we've got all this coming up with this next Ziltoid record that had been the original intention of doing next, I thought, well, maybe we could find a studio at the end of the tour on the Soundwave Festival we were doing, record the drums while we were on tour, and then I could just piece it together sort of whenever we had a free moment. So I looked it up and I found a studio. As it turns out, the last date of the Soundwave Festival was in Perth. And I looked it up, and there was a studio that I found, just a Google search, and I think it was called Kingdom Studio. And just a guy, I forget his name too, but his bedroom was actually the control room. Like, his bed was where you had the mixing desk. The speakers were mismatched. But it was a killer sounding room. He had great ears, and we managed to get in there for a reasonably good deal at the end of the tour. So we just booked a hotel, and we stayed for an extra 4 or 5 days after that Soundwave tour. We drove to this studio. We got ourselves, a hostel or some cheap hotel near, and we started recording Epicloud. We tracked all the drums. Ryan did all his drums in Kingdom Studio. And I then took the files and I just started sort of picking at it while we were working on other things, while we were touring, while I was doing interviews for the Deconstruction and the upcoming sort of By a Thread live in London stuff that we had done prior. Nobody knew about the Epicloud record, and I hadn't really expressed to anybody that I was working on it. My thought was I was just going to get it done, and if it turned out to be worth a shit, I would then just put it out. But famous last words, it snowballed like they all did, and as I started piecing together the songs that weren't on a more structurally simple process. So I just lost my train of thought. I just got a text. What the hell was I talking about? I'm talking about Epicloud. Talking about those simple structures. Talking about Ryan recording in there. Talking about going back on tour after with the hard drive and working on that. Talking about not expecting it to be coming out, and nobody knew it was coming out. Right, okay. So I then started to work on the songs that weren't quite as straight ahead, like Effervescent or True North or Grace or things like this. And I started thinking, man, it'd be really cool to hear a gospel choir on this. I'm not sure where that inclination came from, and straight out of the blue. I think there's also the sense that I love the sound of a gospel choir and the sort of jubilant nature of the music that was coming out, specifically on the heels of Deconstruction. Seemed like if we accented that with something that has that sort of aesthetic, this sort of gospel choir aesthetic, it could elevate this already jubilant sound to something that's a bit euphoric in a way. So I contacted a local gospel choir, Marcus Mosley's choir, I think his name was, and his partner, I forget what his name was as well. It was so long ago. But they were great people, and they had a choir, a gospel choir around Vancouver. And because it was a gospel choir, my own insecurity always makes me feel that although I will always write the music that I need to write, regardless of what it says, what it is, like I follow that. So as a result of that, I tend to go into these things specifically with like a gospel choir, or maybe they have like a religious overtone to them. I don't want to offend them. I don't want to present the music that it seems like we're putting a gospel choir on it ironically. I have no intention of trying to hurt anybody. I'm just trying to follow what I did. So I sat down with Marcus and the choir and I said, listen, this is the intent. This is what came before. This is what I'm doing. This is what the objective is for the entire career. I'm looking for a gospel choir on this. Here's the lyrics. Is this acceptable to you? And they went through everything and they said, yeah, no, this is cool. So we went into the Armory studio. At this point, I had the drums edited. I had started doing overdubs with bass and guitar and things like that in the off time or while we were on tour. So I had sort of rough tracks going, and I had roughed in the choral parts that I wanted to do, which is typically my technique. I'll sing them all, sing all the harmonies, and then I'll send the stems of those separated harmonies to the orchestrator and say, this is how it needs to go. And then we go through dynamics, and then it's good. So we did the same thing there. I said, these are the notes, here's the lyrics, here's the harmonies. This is the emotional arc of this particular part. And in this moment here, what we're trying to do is create this dynamic. Like there's a crescendo here, there's a decrescendo here, this is over the top, this is whispered, whatever, right? We tracked the choir over the course of 3 days at the Armory Studios in Vancouver. And at that point, I started to become excited about it. At that point, it stopped being like a little curiosity in my life and more just like, another record I was working on. And then, because I'm me, the original idea of being this understated little pop record ended up being replaced by not only the gospel choir, Annika van Giersbergen again singing with me, but also the original intent of writing those songs to sort of understand how structures work became this source of like real duress. I remember writing this letter of apology to myself during the period which we were getting ready to release Epicloud. And it wasn't because I disliked it. I really liked it. And it wasn't because I thought that the music was stupid, although the structures are, arguably dumb for a lot of ways. The whole angle that I was able to sort of adhere myself emotionally to, so I didn't feel like I was just being a cad, just being a fraud, was to sing about things that are important to me. Sing about, friends of mine passing away, or sing about people that I'm having, love issues with, or sing about those things, but just use structures that make it a little less obtuse to get into. And I just wrote this letter about myself. I said, Dev, I can't believe that why would you do this? As opposed to things like The Moth, or things like really getting into your creative psychology. I've got people in my life, friends, family, fellow musicians, that are always critical of my analytical process. They're like, you're just always reopening wounds. And I disagree. My thought is the only way through the traumas and the hang-ups and the things that have been stumbling blocks for me, the recidivism of the ways in which my life keeps repeating these issues until we found a solution for it, is just so obvious that why would I not just dig into these things? And it's not about reveling in analysis or swimming upstream in a river of your own spunk. It's more the fastest way out is through. And I feel that if I'm ever going to make any progress on the things that I recognize that are causing me problems psychologically or as a trigger or anything like this, I have to be afraid to face them. I have to be unafraid to face them, sorry. And I was really convinced that as a result of putting that type of intense musical psychoanalysis of myself aside to make something like Epicloud would be akin to surrendering, I guess, or giving up. And I was just so upset. I was like, I can't believe that I wrote those songs. And every time I listened to them, I really loved them too. So, side note, as a 53-year-old man, I've come to a place of great peace with my psychological process. And perhaps that peace came from admitting to myself that although I will fight for what it is that I believe in, I'm not claiming by any stretch of the imagination that I'm right. So I went through the process with Epicloud, and in fact, the turmoil that I felt from focusing on that type of music with Epicloud was also based on the fact that I didn't want the audience to think that I was trying to become like trying to write a hit single. I didn't want the audience to think that it was anything other than it's just interested. It was an experiment in structures and then, long story long, as a result of that turmoil that I felt with Epicloud, that's when I began writing Casualties of Cool. Before I'd even met Che, I began writing those songs because they were quiet and reserved. I had done Daddy and Mountaintop and The Bridge and like a lot of those kinds of things. When I met Che, and then she was able to take the vocals and lyrics and change it into something better than what I had done. But regardless, I doubt Casualties of Cool would have existed had I not been so concerned that the intent in which I had utilized and made the choice to pursue that type of music on Epicloud was rooted in exploration rather than trying to pull one over on people. You know what I mean? Maybe you don't. It doesn't matter. It actually doesn't matter. I just think that the best use of my time with these podcasts is to just explain what I was thinking or feeling at the time. And again, is it right? Is it wrong? It's arbitrary. It's just what I was feeling, right? So we finished the gospel choir, and all of a sudden it started taking shape. And then there were two other people that got involved with it at this point that I felt really defined that record. First off, of course, was Annika van Giersbergen, who's been a friend and a co-conspirator with me for many years. Hey, Devin here. So, to experience the full, unedited release of this episode and gain access to the deeper world of our creative imagination over here at Heavy Devy Records, you can join us at dvn.fm. This is Dev. Thanks again.